Hi, I'm Sid,
and Howard from Hashbridge.
and today we're on the Building in the Burbs podcast. So today we're on our second episode with Kyle, building MycoLogic. So today we're going to be talking with Kyle Gabriel here at Kennesaw State University on how he built MycoLogic, which is a actually I'll let you talk about it. So tell us a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about MycoLogic.
So I'm Kyle Gabriel. I'm by training a microbiologist, but I have a background in programming and engineering as a hobby. So I've had a long history with mushroom cultivation, either foraging and growing in my home, and then throughout my career I just naturally brought it into the laboratory, and then just the progression of that research led to the formation of our company that essentially provides technology for people to grow mushrooms more effectively, providing the facilities to regulate the environment, such as temperature, humidity, and CO2, to optimize the cultivation of mushrooms at a commercial level.
So, like, what kind of got you into
Microbiology.
microbiology, like into that realm? Were you always interested in that, or like where did that interest kind of come from?
Yeah, I always had an interest in just biology in general, and then over the years of learning more about what my interests were, I sort of focused more on microbiology, and specifically within microbiology, mycology, which is related to fungi, which is a broad range of organisms. It could be yeast that brew beer to the organisms that produce fruiting bodies of fungi, which are mushrooms. So a lot of what I focus on is related to food. So within agriculture, so producing and using fungi to produce food. So mushrooms are a big part of that, with culinary mushrooms, but there's also nutraceuticals or medicinal mushrooms. But the aspect of fungi is sort of what I am most interested in.
So I know you kind of mentioned about the transformation or transition from your interest to creating a business. Kind of like, I know you have the interest, but like, what kind of led you to go into the business and start a company?
So through the university, were awarded 2 USDA grants to sort of look at whether we can develop this technology further. So this automation, these controlled environments, and through that we developed what we thought would be a good product for the market. And then through Hatchbridge, we went through understanding customers, customer discovery, and saw that there might be an opportunity to form a business that could be profitable. So that's sort of how we went from a research experimental area in the lab to forming the business.
So those grants that you mentioned, what was the process for getting those grants?
So the USDA and a number of other organizations will put out requests for proposals, and you essentially put together a proposal that you think is compelling enough for them to fund you, and you have to make it competitive, against everyone else who is applying for that particular award. And then if you're awarded it, then you're given the funds to be able to complete that project, whatever it is. So we've applied to several USDA grants, and we're funded for 2 of them related to mushroom cultivation.
Kind of like a scholarship for
Yep.
school kind of thing.
So, how has been the transition from a researcher to an entrepreneur? How's that been? What are the challenges you've faced, and what are the tools you have as a researcher that have really helped you as an entrepreneur?
So initially it was fairly easy because I sort of took the role as CTO, or the technology officer. So I was mainly doing what I was doing in the research lab in the business, and we had a dedicated CEO to be able to handle the other management aspects of the company. And so I got to focus just on the technology aspect, which is what I mainly do in the laboratory. And then once our CEO left, I assumed that role. So that's when it became a little more different than what I'm used to. I had to learn a lot of the business aspects that I wasn't necessarily familiar with, and weren't necessarily what I wanted to focus on, because technology is the core of the business, and I wanted to be able to make that as good as it can be. But you can't have both CEO and CTO roles at the same time and be equally good at both. So that's been sort of a pain point in the process. But I've learned a lot about how the business operates from taking that role. But ideally, I'd like to have more focus on developing into technology because this is essentially the heart of the business.
So do you feel like having another person as the CEO versus you being the CEO is more, I guess, efficient as far as allowing the business to grow? Or
I think efficient, and also we have to sort of give people roles of what they're good at. And I wouldn't necessarily say the CEO role is my strong point. Developing the technology is what I think I would excel at when I compare the two roles.
Have you been able to connect to, so with the mushroom growing community, how have you been able to connect with them?
So we have, through our USDA grant, collaborators. These are from small family farms to the largest mushroom cultivator in Georgia. And we initially made those connections, but throughout the process of working with farmers to acquire agricultural materials, going to conferences, we've made a lot of additional networking with mushroom growers. So really, just working with our collaborators with the grants, and also just day-to-day activities where we are trying to run a business that provides services for mushroom growers and farmers that want to get into mushroom growing. We inevitably just have a large number of contacts with people with various forms of experience of mushroom growing, from never having grown a single mushroom and are interested in it to very experienced and have their own businesses and want to expand it and develop it further.
And I know we've kind of been talking about like MycoLogic right now, but what were the early days like for the business as far as
So we have a pretty unique experience forming our business in that we came out of the university. So initially we were fully funded by USDA grants, and we were operating completely within the laboratory. We were, it was just a thought in our minds that we were going to develop something that could form a company. And as we started developing things that were potentially patentable and trade secrets and things that would make a company worthwhile to form, we started thinking about how we're going to move outside the university, because ultimately you want the company to be self-sustaining. And so first thing to do is to incorporate, and then to start finding a base of operations outside the university. We then licensed the tech that we developed in the laboratory from KSU so that we can utilize it outside the university. And then we started pursuing funding outside the university. One of the issues with grants is that you have to spend and use all the money through the university, and that's a pretty intricate process, whereas other funds that come to the company can be directly deposited into your bank account, and you can use those funds how you please. So that's sort of how we've sort of been moving from 100% within the laboratory to an independent, self-sustaining company outside of it.
But you're still running research alongside as well.
Yeah, and I just applied for another USDA grant, so if we get that, it would be something that would further support research with mushroom cultivation. But in the long run, we're trying to separate ourselves from the university as much as we can and to be independently operating.
And I don't know if you've had a company other than MycoLogic, or has it just been MycoLogic?
I have an LLC that I operate under that I've built and sold scientific instruments to the CDC.
Okay. Because I was asking that because I was wondering, do you feel like a company based off research versus just a company that's just kind of their passion or something that they feel is a need in the community? Do you feel like with it being research backed, it's a little bit more meaningful, I guess you could say?
I think whether you are developing a company from within the university or within a laboratory with the pretense of research or not, I think you're still conducting experiments. You are developing a product and you're iterating on it. You're seeing what works and what doesn't work, and you're trying to improve it. So I think we sort of have an advantage that we have all the resources at the university to be able to do the kind of research that helps us validate whether what we're doing is working or not. But I think anybody who is iterating and developing a product is doing similar to what we're doing. But the only difference is that we have a very large amount of resources that are within the university, and we have the ability to have support when we write grants to the USDA to make them a little bit more competitive.
What has been some of the changes over time, and like how have you grown your staff? What resources have you added to, apart from moving into Ashbridge? What are like the major changes you've seen of MycoLogic from day one as to today?
So the main focus has been the actual product, the fruiting environment, the facility that grows the mushrooms. And we've had several iterations on that. We're currently in our third generation fruiting module that has been a long progression since 2018 when I built the first one. And from the USDA grants, we built our first one, our generation one. The second USDA grant, we built our 3 of our second generation units. And then the third generation has been built completely from funds that are external from Kennesaw State, so all from non-grant funding sources. And some of the progressions that were major was hiring an engineer to help with some of the design aspects. So even though a lot of the product has been designed, being able to make those designs in a format that we can hand to a third-party manufacturer to build was one of the big steps in being able to turn this into a product that can be mass-produced. Whereas previously I was doing all of the fabrication, I was modifying all of these shipping containers to produce these environments, and being able to get all of those designs that were essentially in my head and in shorthand notation everywhere into engineering drawings that can be handed to a third-party manufacturer to produce independently was a pretty huge milestone. So that was one of the biggest changes. As far as our staff, we've kept it pretty lean. We've only at any given time had one person on the payroll. It's been our CEO previously, and now we have a director of business operations that helps with pretty much every aspect of the business.
And is there like I guess to keep it lean is more so just to be more efficient as far as like growing the business while you're having staff under, right?
Yeah, until we can become profitable enough to hire more people, we want to make sure that we're using our funds in a rational way and we're only paying for what we need to pay for.
Yeah.
It can be easy to have a high burn rate and go through your funds pretty quickly. And so when you come to the point where you're out of funds, you have to make a decision about do you stop paying your employees or do you shut the company down? What do you do when you don't have more profits than losses? So we're not necessarily making a large amount of profits. So until we get to that point, we have to run pretty leanly. And I think most companies are at that point initially until they take off.
Yeah, definitely.
What are your future plans for MycoLogic? Where do you see MycoLogic at the end of this year, and then over the next 5 years?
So what we're focusing on this year is developing our sales channel. So finding how to tap into the ideal customer. How do we have a reproducible system to find them so that we can sell our products? That's our main focus. That's what's going to bring in our revenue. From there, we need to sort of expand our team. If we are able to sell enough units to where we can start hiring more employees, then what we need to do is hire a dedicated sales representative to be able to take that pipeline we've developed and start running with it. From there on, I'm constantly trying to further develop the product, improve it. We also need to develop a tech support system. So right now, it's just me pretty much doing all of the tech support, and that's not going to be sustainable if we have 50, 100 units out in the wild. It's going to be a completely different scenario than where I couldn't possibly provide enough tech support if we have a potential issue that affects all of those.
And if you were to kind of go back to when you first started MycoLogic, is there anything that you feel you would maybe have done differently or done earlier?
I mean, it's hard to say, knowing now what we know about our customer discovery, how we would have changed it. But we would have focused on different things, knowing what we know now. But that's the process of trying to understand who your customers are. People you might understand or think that your customers initially may not be your customers. They may say they would buy this product, but they may not actually buy it. So going back, we would probably focus on the customers that we think are the more promising customers now, but that's something that you can't predict until you actually go through that process.
Definitely. 100%.
What exactly do you, how do you, what exactly do you look for in a customer and you think of them as like a very good prospect? This is someone that you're going to, sell them a fruiting module to.
Well, there may be a lot of people that say they would buy your product, but the people that actually will put the money out to buy it may be a completely different section of the market, or a subset of those people. And so being able to hone in on how you find those people, how you determine what is honest when they're talking to you about whether they like or whether they would buy your product. It's not always easy. So sometimes the people that say they would buy your product wouldn't, or they may buy your product under certain conditions. And trying to find those conditions, or to find those people that would buy that product that are in that right environment, is sometimes really difficult to find.
So would you say it's like a lot of trial and error in that?
Yep, there's a lot of talking to a lot of people, asking them what their issues are, seeing if what you solve matches their issues. And then also, because we're dealing with a very high price point item, you have to make sure that they have the capital and are willing to pay for something at that price point.
Yeah. So what kind of advice would you offer to researchers and scientists trying to have an idea, or they see a need in the community and they feel like, okay, I think I can go to the market with this?
So customer discovery is pretty much the biggest thing that you should focus on. You may have what you think is a good product, but you should validate that with experiments. You should go out, talk to people, find out if that's actually solving a problem that they have. So we often get caught up in biases where we think that we developed something great and that's useful and people will pay for, but it may turn out to be completely opposite of the actual case when you actually try to sell it. So customer discovery is something you're always doing. We're constantly doing it all the time, even though we've had our business for years now. So you can never really start it too early. Even when you're in the concept phase, that's probably the best time to start before you actually invest heavily in a product, is to see if you should even pursue trying to build that product.
So sometimes it may just be a need to completely pivot from your initial idea that you had.
Yeah, or you may find that the customer base that is ideal for your product is not anything what you thought it was. So there may still be a need, but you may need to reevaluate how you're going to find those people that want and would use your product.
Is there ever a time where you have to pivot on customer feedback?
Yeah, so our understanding as we go through the process of developing this and outsourcing the production of it, the price point has become higher than it was previously. So we've now excluded certain customers that previously would have paid for it at a lower price point. Because now that it's at a higher price point, they're no longer looking at it as something that's desirable to them.
As far as a higher price point, like, how do you know, like, how do you find the balance between keeping the price point that you're at versus going to the higher price point, knowing that some of your customers may not continue to buy at that price point?
This was a little bit of, when I look back at the early development, I was developing these for the lowest price point that I could feasibly do it at. And this was where I was building them completely by hand myself. And the price is going to be a lot different when you outsource that to a third-party manufacturer. We don't have a $500,000 fabrication facility to be able to mass produce these ourselves. So for this to be able to be produced at the scale to where it becomes profitable for us, we have to outsource that. And so it's inevitable that we had to increase our price. Otherwise, we would lose all of our margins and we wouldn't have a viable company. So moving it from a laboratory-based research project into a product that can be produced at a larger scale inevitably meant that it had to increase in the cost to produce it. And so for us to be able to keep margins that allow our businesses to survive, we had to increase that price as well. So it wasn't a choice that, it was a choice that we needed to make, not a choice that we chose but didn't have to make.
What is probably the most satisfying thing though, founding and being at MycoLogic?
Satisfying thing for me is probably seeing um, something that I built that I had an interest in developing into something that other people are able to benefit from. I've always had interest in producing my own food, and in fact, the open source software that I developed that is partly used in this product is enjoyed by hundreds of people around the world right now, growing plants and animals, and using it to automate systems that help them grow and be their own producers. So I see that as a satisfying thing in and of itself. Not only that I get to incorporate my open source software, but it's something that I've been passionate about and building for 15, 20 years now. But I also now get to maybe build a successful company that enables people to grow mushrooms at mass scale, be able to sell those in markets. There's something a little more satisfying building something that allows people to grow food than a lot of other products that are in the market that just sort of fulfill people's desires. This is fulfilling people's need to eat and also enjoy nutritious, delicious foods.
Absolutely.
Another question that I have is, so with the fruiting modules, you're mostly selling these to growers rather than actual, people that actually are the ones eating mushrooms. Why did you choose to go into a business-to-business model rather than a business-to-customer model?
We initially didn't want to open, say, a mushroom farm of our own and run that. We wanted to develop the technology further. We may see down the road that we may open our own farm and start having recurring revenue that way. But our initial business model is focusing on producing these growing environments for other growers. It doesn't mean that we may not pivot or have a side business that does this as well. And I totally foresee us having our own farm for R&D. When we have the resources to a capacity where we can have our own farm operating and we can start doing more experiments, I think we're also going to develop the tech further as well. But again, it all comes down to money, and it's until we start getting recurring sales into where we have enough revenue to be able to afford our own farm for ourselves, we're just focusing on selling these units to farmers.
Also, specifically, why why make the fruiting modules out of shipping containers?
So initially, we found that shipping containers are widely accessible. You could find used shipping containers around the world very cheaply. And the heart of the first USDA grant was to see if we could take these very abundant, low-cost, often abandoned pieces of material like shipping containers when they get to the end of their life and reuse those into producing food. So initially, this was very laborious. We had to modify these extensively, and they were not easily transformed into ideal environments. Insulation was a big issue, and as we solved these issues and moved into our second and third generation units, we found that even though shipping containers are very nice to transport, they can be transported by land, air, and sea. They're one of the most moved items around the world, so they can be easily moved to different locations. It's a very small footprint, and in these very small footprints, you can produce a very large number of mushrooms. So for the fact that they're easily transportable, they're not a permanent structure, they're easy to work with in that capacity. So they were something that we initially started working with. We found that they are a good size, they're easy to acquire, and they're easy to work with, especially for modifications. It doesn't mean we're not also exploring permanent structures, pouring a foundation, putting an insulated room on that foundation. But initially, shipping containers are a logical choice if you wanted to build a modular farm where you start with one or two shipping containers and then you add to those as you build capacity, as you start increasing your revenue. And it's something that can easily scale.
Yeah, it can be quickly deployed anywhere.
Yeah,
rather than trying to secure property and then trying to, grading the whole construction.
Exactly, that's another aspect where you can bring a shipping container into an abandoned parking lot and you can start growing mushrooms within a week. You don't have to do any site prep. You don't need arable land like you do with plants. You can have it pretty much in any location that you have water and power, and you can start growing mushrooms.